If we take our pivot chart at Employees PivotChart Excel file, it's in your working folder, then we can look at controlling the fields that we're using within the pivot chart. Now this one currently has the department in the axes and count of ID. So it's telling us how many people are in each department. And the relative height of each of these columns tells us effectively that the sales department is the biggest. And if we ignore the blank, then finance and accounts are the smallest two. Now, if we wanted to add in further fields or change the fields, then we simply drag and drop as we've done with a pivot table. So if I didn't want to know the count of ID by department, I could take the department out. And you see I get one big block then, which is just the total of everybody because it's responding immediately. And I could bring the county into the axes category section. And we see we then get a block for each county. I could drag that out again. And then we could drag in the marital status. And then again, we get a block for each marital status, where single is just a bit higher than married, divorced is quite low, and then we have some blank data. Now, if you want to start mixing multiple fields, that's when the pivot chart really starts to get quite clever. So let's leave the marital status there and add in the department again. Now, we can either add it into the axes, so the category section here, and you see then what happens is it's then grouped by married, divorced, and single, and then broken down by each department that has values in that section. For example, divorced doesn't have anybody in personnel, so there's no personnel bar. Now you could swap these two around. So it was department first, so effectively grouping by the department and then the marital status. And you can see it then groups by department and then breaks down each bar by the relevant marital status. Alternatively, we can actually put one of these fields in the legend section. And you see then it differs. Now we have a separate section for each department, so that's along the axes, but we have a bar of a different colour for each marital status. That then allows us to compare, for example, single between departments. So the sales department has the biggest number of single people, but the operations has the biggest number of married people. And then clerical and operations has the smallest number of divorced, unless you count accounts that has no divorced people and no single people, because there's only one person in it. So you can see we can place any of our fields in effectively either of the two main areas, which is the axes for the category and the legend for the series, or we can even swap them around to see what that will look like. So that our marital status then goes along the bottom, and then each bar represents the height of the department count. So it depends on really how you're trying to present the data. If you think of these as rows and columns when they're in the table format, then that might make it easier to understand how your graph will look. Not always, but it might. Or they can both be in the same, in which case it gets broken down along the axis at the bottom. I certainly quite like that option. Now, if you were to add in another field just to complicate matters, let's say, for example, the sex field into the marital status, then you can see that we are grouping by the marital status and then have little bars for each of the genders, where male, female, male, female, male, female. Now, it will really depend on your data as to whether that makes any sense at all when you're breaking things down. And we could even move that into the legend instead. And you can see then it gets a little confusing because we have clerical 1, clerical 2. So that's male clericals, female clericals. And the same for operations. Finance only has males, no females in there. The duplication just makes that a little easier to read. That would look better along the bottom. Maybe even the other way around. So then we have males split by their marital status, and then the height of each bar represents each department. And then we have females split by their marital status, and then the height of each bar represents each department. That way you can see that the operations department really has the most of a single gender against a single marital status, which is married, because it's the highest bar. So you're in control. Feel free to play and drag about when you're playing with pivot charts. You are not affecting the data whatsoever. The data remains untouched. The data is still intact. That's all over here in the employees. You're not touching it or amending it. You're effectively just changing the display type of your data. Try and make it more interesting or more easy to read, because a picture tells 1,000 words.